My toxic family stole my inheritance, then karma crashed their world. The judge's voice was just a low, indistinct hum in the background, like a fly buzzing on a windowsill. The only thing I could truly focus on, the only thing that felt real in that suffocatingly quiet courtroom, was my aunt smirking at me from across the room. It wasn't a small, subtle smile. It was a broad, triumphant sneer that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. She was radiating victory. They had done it. They had actually, truly done it, and they believed with every fiber of their being that they had gotten away with it. They had the forged will, a masterpiece of deception. They had the coached witnesses, friends of theirs paid to spew lies about my parents' final wishes. And most painfully, they had my entire inheritance, my parents' life's work, sitting safely in their bank accounts. They really honestly thought they'd won. But they didn't know me, and more importantly, they didn't know my father. They had no idea that the universe, and a little-known, brilliantly crafted clause my dad had hidden in his real will years ago, was about to serve up a brand of karma so swift and so devastating, they never, ever saw it coming. To really understand the depth of their betrayal and the coldness in that courtroom, you have to understand my family dynamic. It was always a story of two opposite poles. On one end there were my parents John and Mary, and me. I was their only child, the quiet, responsible one who preferred a book over a loud party. My parents were my entire world, the most loving, genuine, and hardworking people you could ever hope to meet. They started a custom furniture business from a dusty garage, with nothing but a set of old tools and a shared dream. I spent my childhood watching them pour their sweat and soul into that business, learning firsthand what integrity and a hard day's work really mean. They weren't just building furniture. They were building a legacy of quality and honesty. They were also meticulous planners. They'd sat me down when I went to college and told me they had a will, that everything was in order. They didn't get into the nitty-gritty details, but the big picture was crystal clear. As their only child, I would be taken care of, and so would a few key charities they cared deeply about, like the local animal shelter and a children's art program. And then you have the other pole. My mom's sister, Aunt Carol, and her two sons, my cousins Rick and Tom. To put it as nicely as possible, they were the complete antithesis of my parents. Carol drifted through life on a cloud of staggering entitlement. She believed the world, and specifically my parents, owed her a living. She couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months, always complaining that the boss was unfair or the work was beneath her. She treated my parents like her own personal ATM, calling at all hours with a new sob story, a new crisis that only a few $100 or a few $1,000s could solve. My cousins Rick and Tom were just chips off the old block. They were always cooking up some get-rich-quick scheme, some multi-level marketing scam, or a can't-miss investment that would inevitably crash and burn, leaving my parents to pick up the pieces. For years I just watched them circle my parents like vultures, their smiles utterly fake, their compliments dripping with a thick, syrupy poison of jealousy. My parents, bless their generous hearts, were kind, but they weren't stupid. They'd loan Carol money, always putting it in air quotes when they told me about it, knowing full well it was a gift they'd never see a penny of again. But when it came to their business, their home, their life's work, they kept a firm line. Or so I had always believed. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, staring at a spreadsheet, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A car accident. A wrong-way driver on the highway. A head-on collision. Just like that, in the space of a single horrifying phone call, my entire world was gone. The days and weeks that followed weren't just a fog. They were a thick, suffocating blackout of grief. I felt like I was moving through water, every action requiring immense effort. I could barely think, let alone make the 1,000 decisions that need to be made when someone dies. And right on cue, as if she'd been waiting in the wings for this exact tragedy, Aunt Carol swooped in. She didn't come with genuine comfort or a shoulder to cry on. She came with an agenda. She was a whirlwind of fake sympathy and performative crocodile tears, constantly patting my arm and saying things like, "Oh, you poor dear, you're in no state to handle all of this. Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing. I'll handle all the unpleasant paperwork." And like a fool, drowning in my own sea of grief and exhaustion, I let her. It was the single biggest mistake of my life. She took charge of everything. When I'd offer to help sort through their office, she'd say, No, that's my job as your mother's sister. You just focus on grieving." She intercepted mail. She gathered up all their documents, their financial records, their address books, their keys. She systematically and methodically became the sole gatekeeper to my parents' entire life. And I was in such a vulnerable, shattered state, I just didn't see the bars of the cage she was patiently, expertly building around my future. About a month after the funeral, once the flowers had wilted and the sympathy cards stopped coming, Carol called a family meeting. My stomach twisted into a knot. The meeting was at my parents' house, which she was now occupying, and which already felt so cold and alien without them. It was just her, my cousins and me sitting around the large dining room table my father had built with his own hands. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Rick and Tom wouldn't even look me in the eye, choosing instead to stare intently at their phones or the patterns on the wallpaper. Then Carol, with a dramatic clearing of her throat, dropped the bomb. She slid a document, bound in a neat blue folder, across the polished wood of the table. Stopped right in front of me. "This is your parents' final will and testament," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly, condescending sweetness. "They had a change of heart, you see. In their final months." My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. Then I saw it. The will named Carol as the sole executor of the estate. And it left me an insulting, dismissive pittance of $1,000. $1,000 from a multi-million-dollar estate. The rest. The house I grew up in, the business they built from nothing, their savings, my entire future, my entire legacy, was to be split evenly between her and her two sons. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room started to spin. "This isn't real," I stammered, looking up at her. "It's a lie. This is a joke. My parents would never, they would never do this." "Oh, but they did," Carol snapped, her mask of sympathy dissolving to reveal the hard, cruel face beneath. "They were very disappointed in you. So distant, so wrapped up in your own life. They finally realized who their real family was, the ones who were always there for them." She was trying to sell this preposterous story of undue influence, that she had somehow spent their last days turning them against their own daughter. But I knew my parents. I knew our relationship. This wasn't a story of emotional manipulation. This was just straight-up, cold-blooded fraud. I pleaded with them. I turned to Rick and Tom, appealing to any shred of decency they might have. They just smirked and looked away. "Be reasonable," I begged, my voice cracking. "You know this is wrong." They just laughed at me. Rick scoffed. "Looks like you're the one who's not being reasonable. It's right there in black and white." Carol called me greedy and ungrateful, accusing me of disrespecting my parents' final wishes. I walked out of that house feeling like I'd been hollowed out. I hadn't just lost my parents. I had lost my entire life, my past and my future, all in one afternoon. The very next day I found a lawyer. He was an older, straight-shooting man named Mr. Gable who didn't sugarcoat things. He reviewed my story and said, "Look, this is going to be an uphill battle. A very steep, very expensive hill. Contesting a will is brutal," he explained, "especially when you're claiming forgery. We had to prove not just that the will was a fake but who faked it and how. And the cruelest irony of all? My aunt, using her power as the so-called executor, was free to use my parents' own money, my inheritance, to hire a team of expensive, shark-like lawyers to fight me. It was a total, sickening perversion of justice. The legal battle was an absolute nightmare. It dragged on for what felt like an eternity, draining my savings account and my will to fight. We would demand a formal accounting of the estate, but Carol would stall at every single turn, filing nonsensical motions and claiming delays. We subpoenaed bank records and it was exactly what we expected, only worse. She and her sons were living like lottery winners. They took a month-long trip to Europe, first class all the way. Rick bought a bright red sports car. Tom was posting pictures of himself on a yacht. They were bleeding the estate dry, burning through my parents' legacy, all while their lawyers painted me in court as some bitter, money-hungry daughter who couldn't accept being cut out. I was on the verge of not just financial ruin but a complete mental breakdown. And that brings us back to that stale, tense courtroom. Carol's lawyer had just wrapped up his closing argument, a masterful performance painting her as the grieving, responsible sister and me as the spoiled child. He held up the forged will as if it were the Holy Grail. To the naked eye, the signatures looked plausible. The witness statements, though filled with lies, were consistent. My aunt's smirk was pure, venomous triumph. She truly believed she had won. Then my lawyer, Mr. Gable, stood up. He moved with a quiet, deliberate confidence. First, he called our handwriting expert back to the stand for rebuttal. The expert was a calm, academic man who broke down his analysis with digital overlays on a large screen for the judge to see. He pointed out the microscopic hesitations in the pen strokes, the subtle differences in pressure and flow on the downstrokes of my father's signature, the slight tremor in my mother's. He explained these were the telltale signs of a very skilled but imperfect forgery, someone tracing or trying to imitate a signature they had practiced. He planted a solid seed of doubt, but in a case like this, doubt wasn't quite enough. Then Mr. Gable paused, letting the silence hang in the air before he said, "Your Honor, we have discovered a previously unfiled original will executed by John and Mary 5 years prior." Carol's lawyer shot up from his seat. "Objection. This is a desperate last-minute fabrication." The judge, however, looked intrigued. He waved him down with a stern, "Sit down, counsel. and gestured for Mr. Gable to continue. Mr. Gable explained that my dad, ever the cautious planner, had a deep-seated distrust of keeping all his important documents in one place. Years ago he had lodged a fully executed and notarized copy of his true will with his old university's law firm for safekeeping. It was his ultimate fail-safe. We had only found a record of it after a desperate week-long search through a mountain of his old records, finally uncovering a single piece of correspondence that mentioned the archival copy. Mr. Gable retrieved the authenticated document from his briefcase and placed it before the judge. It was perfect. But the real genius wasn't just having a second will. It was a specific clause my dad in his infinite wisdom had included. Mr. Gable put on his reading glasses and read the clause aloud, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom. It is what is known as an in terrorem clause, Your Honor, but with a unique and powerful twist. It states, and I quote, "Should any beneficiary named herein or any party seeking to benefit from this estate attempt to subvert the intended and rightful distribution of this estate through fraudulent means, including but not limited to the presentation of a forged or otherwise falsified testamentary document to a court of law, their claim to any and all assets, bequests, or appointments described herein shall be rendered immediately and irrevocably null and void." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Carol's smirk finally melted away. It didn't just falter, it collapsed. It was replaced by a wave of slack-jawed confusion, which quickly morphed into a dawning, pale-faced horror as the words sank in. The judge took a long, painstaking time comparing the two documents, the authenticated, archived original versus the forgery our expert had so convincingly torn apart. The smug looks on my aunts' and cousins' faces completely curdled into raw, unadulterated panic. Rick was sweating profusely and Tom looked like he was about to be physically ill. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a thunderclap. This court finds the will presented by the executor, Ms. Carol Jennings, to be a fraudulent document, the judge declared, his voice booming with authority. It is hereby invalidated. The original will, as presented by Mr. Gable, shall be admitted to probate. But he wasn't done. The judge took off his glasses and leaned forward, his eyes locking directly on my aunt. Additionally, this court sees no reason not to invoke the brilliantly constructed fraud penalty clause within the valid will. As Ms. Jennings and her sons, Rick and Tom Jennings, have been found to have knowingly and deliberately perpetrated this fraud in a court of law, any inheritance they might have received under the true will is officially and completely voided. My aunt made a choked, gasping sound like she had been punched in the stomach. It was the sound of pure, uncomprehending disbelief. They hadn't just lost the case. They had been utterly and completely wiped out by my father's brilliant posthumous planning. They played their hand and my dad had a trump card waiting from beyond the grave. And the karma was just getting warmed up. The judge continued, his voice cold as ice. He ordered Carol to repay from her own pocket every single dollar she had spent from the estate on her own legal fees to fight me. Then he ordered a full and complete forensic accounting of the estate and mandated that she and her sons personally pay back every last cent of the estate funds they had stolen for their lavish trips, their cars and their decadent lifestyle. Then came the final, devastating blow. The judge looked from my aunt to her sons, then back again. Because of the overwhelming evidence of felony-level forgery and what appears to be a coordinated conspiracy for felony embezzlement, this court is referring the entire case, with all its exhibits and testimonies, to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. The color drained completely from their faces. They weren't just broke. They were now facing serious prison time. They had gambled everything for a fortune that was never theirs, and in the end, they lost more than they could ever have possibly imagined. The fallout was as swift as it was brutal. My aunt, buried under a mountain of court-ordered debt, had to sell her house and everything in it just to begin to cover the money she was ordered to repay to the estate. My cousins, broke, disgraced, and facing a grand jury indictment, became total pariahs. Their flashy friends vanished overnight, and their names became synonymous with scandal in our community. The world they had tried to build on a rotten foundation of greed and lies just crashed down around them in a spectacular storm of their own making. It took the better part of a year to sort out the financial mess they had made, working with accountants to claw back what we could. But eventually, I received the inheritance my parents had always wanted me to have. The money was a relief, of course, allowing me to finally breathe after the crushing weight of legal fees. But the real win, the true victory, was the justice. It was the feeling of peace that came with knowing my parents' legacy was finally safe from the vultures. I used the money to do exactly what they would have wanted. I reinvested in their business, modernizing it but keeping the spirit of craftsmanship they cherished. I made significant donations in their names to the animal shelter and the children's art program they loved so much. And I started to build a new, quiet life for myself, finally free from all that suffocating toxicity. I learned a very hard lesson about how poisonous and corrosive greed can be, how it can make people do the ugliest things imaginable. But I also learned something about my own resilience and about the enduring power of my father's love. He couldn't be there to protect me in person, but he found a way to do it anyway. My family's betrayal almost broke me, but my father's foresight, shown through one last brilliant move, saved me. They tried to steal my inheritance, but in the end, with a little help from the universe and a very, very smart dad, the only thing they inherited was karma. If you found this story of justice being served satisfying, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. I'm genuinely curious to hear from you. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic family situation over an inheritance or a similar betrayal? Let me know your story in the comments below. Allos, share and like and let us know where you are watching from. Thank you for listening. It's a long road back from something like this, but I finally have peace and I have the profound satisfaction of knowing that good really can win, even when the fight feels absolutely impossible.